Hello and welcome to this little video about migrating your durable functions to Netherite. So what I will be talking about within this video is how can you move your durable function from Azure Storage as a persistency or a storage provider for your function to Netherite as a storage provider. Now, as you're watching this video, I guess you are aware of that there are different options now with respect to providing storage for your durable functions. If you want to learn more about the options, I would recommend the official documentation where the three options that are currently available are described with respect to the dependencies and also the support status. As you can see, only Azure Storage is currently GA, Netherite and MS SQL are in public preview. Nevertheless, from my perspective, it makes sense to try those things out. And within this video, I will now focus on Netherite. As you can see, there is a landing page for Netherite, which covers all the details around Netherite, around the mechanics that Netherite is using, like event hubs and faster memory technology, and so on, and also deals with in-detail production-grade configuration. So if you want to do a deep dive, I highly recommend this page. Now, if you just want to start and try things out and want to get a feeling what configuration changes you have to do, or maybe even code changes, let's see. I would recommend this short video or the Hello sample that's available on the Netherite page. I will basically heavily lean on that sample and guide you through that. Now, the very first question that might come to your mind, well, why should I switch the storage provider? I mean, I'm quite happy with what I have. Now, maybe then you don't need to switch the storage provider. Having said that, there are some use cases that might benefit from using Netherite. And basically the second sentence on this page describes what use cases are targeted by Netherite, namely platforms and applications that are in need of a very high performance, high throughput, high scalability, and high reliability. So if you're hitting with your durable functions kind of the wall with the classical Azure Storage, then Netherite might be worth a look. However, having said that, it's currently in public preview, so it's not GA yet. Now, how will we walk through this migration? So I will walk within this video through the migration in the same way I would walk through with a real function. So first of all, I will make sure that I do the reconfiguration that I need in order to have Netherite as my storage provider completely locally. So I will emulate everything so that I at least have a first feeling that everything is in place. This will be the first part of the video. Then I would switch to a hybrid setup, namely instantiating the needed services in case of Netherite storage and to be precise, blob storage and event hubs as a backing service, and then wire that up to my locally running function so that I have a hybrid setup. And then as a last step, when this works out, I personally would switch to the deployment to the cloud and see if everything is working there. Now, with that, I would say, let's get it started. As I said, I will heavily rely on the code that is available within the samples repository. So you have here within the durable task Netherite a samples repository, which deals with three programming languages, .NET Core, Python, and TypeScript, and also has some helper scripts that we will also use during this video. For this migration, I will focus on TypeScript, because this is a language that I personally like to use, and due to the special nature of all the languages that are not .NET Core and are running in an isolated process and are not executed in process, I think that there are some more things that you should know about in order to overcome maybe some first rough edges. Now, with that, let's switch to the very first step, running Netherite locally. Okay, so what do we have as a basic setup? I have a very basic durable function consisting of three ingredients, one client function, one orchestrator, and one activity function. As you can see, the setup is based on the Azure Functions extension available for Visual Studio Code. So I have here my my durable function client, which just instantiates a new instance of my orchestrator. I have my orchestrator function that simply fills up an array by calling activities in a sequence. I called them Hello City activities, where I have some cities handed in there. I changed the cities a bit in order to have more local connection to where I live. And last but not least, I have the activity with a very simple logic in there. Now, we do not want to focus on how the code is done and that there are more complex examples. We want to focus what we have to do in order to rewire things to make them run with Netherite. Now, first things first, let's see if this function is running with the classical Azure Storage backend. And what I have done is, of course, I have pointed my Azure Web Job Storage to the development storage that I will now start making use of Azurite as a storage provider. And I also make use of the extension bundle, of course, in order to drag in the dependencies for the durable functions. Now, with that in place, let us start the, let's just look, yeah, we are in the right directory. Let's just start the function. So first of all, there is the build. So we will do the TypeScript transpilation. And after that, the function will start up as expected. And we get the expected endpoint. So obviously the storage was found. So now I use an HTTP extension in order to make my request to the endpoint, to my durable functions orchestrator. So I will now send that post request to the endpoint, and I get back the expected status page where I will now do a GET request and hopefully get the expected result. Yes, everything is here as expected. That's already good. So the basic setup is working. We can also cross-check that when looking at the Azure Storage Explorer and take a look at the tables that we have there. We have the history, so the event sourcing table, where we can see all the executions of our orchestrator and activity functions, and we see all the results. So everything is working as expected, so no hiccup there in the basic setup. Now with that, what I will do, I will stop the execution. I will delete everything that has to do with the Azurite. So first I will stop the Azurite execution as a storage provider and delete all the artifacts so that we can start from a clean slate. Okay, now what do we have to do? Well, first of all, Azurite is not part of the extension bundle mechanism, at least not as of now. So the first thing that we have to do is get rid of our extension bundle mechanism. Now, we need to install an extension for the durable function. So I have here a little cheat sheet, which will help me with that. So first of all, I need to install the extensions manually, making use of the funcCLI. As you can see here from the clipboard content, I will install the package of a Netherite Azure Functions in the version 0.50 alpha. That's currently, as I'm recording this video, the most up-to-date version. So this is also the mechanism that you probably know. If not, that's basically the way how you can install extensions in specific versions if you do not want to use the extension bundle mechanism. Now, what happens is basically I get the extensions now configured via an extensions CS project file, where I can see I have my Azure Functions in there, and I have my extensions metadata generator, which always comes in there as default. And I also have those stuff then here within my object folder and within my binary, where I see the durable task Netherite DLL that gets installed. Now, in addition, I now have to configure and to tell my runtime, hey, I want to use Netherite and I want to use it in a very specific setup. In order to do so, we have to add some information in the host.json file. Namely, we have to add a section that's called extensions. So not extension bundle. And we will say, hey, durable task, we rely on a storage provider, which is of the type Netherite. We give some additional information around the event hub name and some basic configuration. So that's really completely super basic. There is a lot more that you can do there. And I have to tell them two ingredients, namely the storage connection name, because Netherite is using Azure Blob Storage in a very specific way, and the event hubs and the event hub connection name that I delegate to the corresponding either environment variables or in variables that are stored within your local settings.json. Now, as you can see, there is an additional parameter here, which is the case orchestration cursors, and I set that value to false. Now, the reason for that is that there is a little bug within the current version of Netherite, which makes your execution fail after the first yield command is executed. And as a workaround, you have to set this value to false. According to the issue, there are no penalties with respect to performance if you do that. But yeah, you definitely should take that one. That's relevant for every language which is not .NET. So for Python, for TypeScript, you would have to set that parameter. Now, as we have here the event hubs connection name, we of course also need to set that within our local settings.json. And here we have to add one additional parameter, namely the event hubs connection. And if you want to do a local emulation, we can set that to memory or memory F. For the details, I would recommend to take a look at the documentation, because that's already quite a detail. Just important to know that's what you have to do in order to make it run locally and to have it completely in an let's say air-gapped scenario where you don't need any backing services from Azure. Now with that, everything is done. So we have installed our extension manually. We have adopted the host.json to take Netherite as storage provider. And we have adopted the local settings so that everything runs in an emulated mode. That's all what we have to do. So we should now be able to execute the function locally. Let's see if that works. So what I will do now is I will start Azurite again in order to have my blob storage up and running. So this is now running. And that's basically it. So I should be able to now run my function. So I will do an npm run start. So the build will start again as before. And now this time the function should go to Netherite as storage provider. So we should not have any tables within our emulated storage anymore. So it seems like everything has started up correctly. Let's go to our request file And let's send a request to the very same endpoint that we sent it before. As you can see, again, we get the very well-known status page, and I will copy again the URI endpoint for the status page. And yeah, everything was completed successfully. So the orchestration seems to work. Now let's take a short look at the Storage Explorer. So there are no more tables that we usually have when we emulate durable functions, but we have a new blob container, which has a very specific structure when it comes to Netherite. So we have all those partitions here, which are necessary in order to make the event hubs very reliable. So all the details, as I said, are within the documentation. So I will not dive into those stuff here. But if the storage looks like that, you're probably good to go. Now, as we have done that now, and everything is running, we should now be able to move on and move to a more hybrid setup. So for that, let's first stop the execution and close everything here. So next, what we would need to do is we would need to do a setup which corresponds to a local function and an event hub and a storage that is hosted on Azure. And that will exactly be the part of the next session. Okay, so let's continue with our migration of our durable function to Netherite. As before the break, we now said, okay, we want now to have a hybrid setup. So I have removed everything that is relevant for Azurite. I will also close down Azurite because we don't need that storage emulator anymore. And now let's set up everything that we need within Azure. Now for that, there are some scripts that are also provided within the Azurite sample repository. I will shortly jump to that sample. So if you go here, you have some scripts here. And you also have some specific scripts that we will need within the implementation for the different languages, namely to run the function in a hybrid mode and to deploy the function, which we will need in the next step. So everything that you see is available there on GitHub. So let's now make use of it. So first things first, what we need to do is to set up everything on Azure. So I have my AZ CLI set up and connected to my Azure account. And no, that's not what I needed. What you need is now to take a look at the settings.ps file. So the PowerShell file that contains the basic settings. And what you at least need to change is give it a name. So we call it now Netherite, so Migrate Netherite or Migrate to Netherite. Let's make it that way. As a name that will then be reused for the resource group name, for the event hub namespace, and so on and so forth. Having said that, that's just for the sake of the demo to get things started. That's definitely not best practice when it comes to naming Azure resources. So it's just for getting things started. Now, depending from where you work, take a look at the location area. I have taken always the lowest possible setting for storage and for event hubs. So revise this file, this settings.ps file, if you want to do it yourself. Make the change, and then you can execute the init.ps file. Now I will start this init.ps file now, and then we will take a look at that one because it takes a bit to execute that one. So let's start it, and something was not right. Of course, I did not save my settings.ps file, something that might happen to you too. which will then tell me exactly what I said to you. If you don't change the name parameter, you will get an error. So now let's try it again, and now it should work. Okay, so what happens with it in a PS file? So it takes the settings, and then what it does, it creates a resource group based on your location and your group name. It will also check if it's already available. If not, if it's already available, it will leave that step out. Then it will create a storage account with the corresponding settings, and it will create an Event Hub's namespace, which is needed for the Netherite backend. And that's basically all that you need as backing services in order to make your function run in a hybrid way. Now let's check where we are. So it's already creating the Event Hub namespace. That's good. So what we can already prepare in the meantime is we have a little script that we have to drag out of the script folder and drag to the move to the main folder. And that's the run TypeScript functions hybrid. Now what this little script does, it again takes your settings file and injects the storage connection string as well as the Event Hub connection into your environment variable. So you don't need to change your local settings.json. This will be available when you use that script as an environment variable. And as you might know, the Azure Functions execution runtime, or the host, will first check the environment variables, then go to local settings.json. It will also do an npm install, function extension install, just to get things going if you have removed that. So you can, of course, comment those stuff out if you think that's unnecessary in your case. At least the npm run start I would leave in there because that starts your function, right? So that's quite easy, decent way in order to check if this hybrid setup works, and you do not have to mingle around with your local settings.json, which is always a bit cumbersome. So at least that's my impression. Okay, so the basic setup now is done. So let's check that. Let's shortly cross-check that. I am here within my Azure account, and as you can see, we have now a resource group that I just check if that's big enough in the video. Yeah, Migrate to Netherite, which contains the Event Hub and the storage account. That looks good, and as you can see, the naming convention is just for demo purposes. Okay, now I think we can now already go one step up and execute the run TypeScript function hybrid, which will now fetch the information from the Azure services, inject them into the environment variables, and then the function should be executable locally with those backing services in Azure. So let's see if that works. So this time settings PS file does not need any changes, so I cannot forget to save that one as I did before. So that looks quite good. There is a restore of the packages of the CS project, pardon me, and there is a build. Okay, and the function started, and here is now the the information that the Azure Web Storage as well as the Event Hubs connection is taken from the environment variables, and it's not taken from the local settings. That's just there because I have them within my local settings. And as you can see, I will shortly put that one down because it's better readable. As you can see, the endpoint is again there, and that looks quite promising, right? So let's check if things work. Let's use the request file again. And as we are running locally, I can do a post request to that endpoint. So I send that post request and I get back a status page. That's already good. Because at least locally everything is working. So now I add my status query URI. I sent the request and ta-da! Great, everything's working. I'm not using any local emulation because I switched off Azurite, so this wouldn't work anyway. Now let's shortly cross-check here if the storage is set up as expected. So what we would expect is this very specific structure that we have seen before. So we remove that one. Yeah. And we see this partitioning structure and this task parameter.json that's available there. So it seems like everything is set up correctly and everything is working as expected with this setup. So going back to my resource group, I now have everything in place and the execution succeeded as expected. That's good. So from that perspective, we have now verified that even the hybrid setup is working. So our configuration seems to be okay. Our deployment of the backing services seems okay. So within the next step, what we have to do is we have to deploy our function to Azure. And this will be the part of the next section of this video. Okay, so what have we achieved until now? We have reconfigured our durable function in order to have it using Netherite as a storage provider. We have tested that in an emulated environment, so completely locally, that works. We have deployed the Azure Blob Storage or the storage and the Event Hub to Azure and used that in a hybrid setup. So you had our function running locally and our backing service running on Azure. That also worked, so everything was fine there. So next logical step is to deploy our function now to Azure and have everything running on Azure using Netherite as a storage provider. Now, in order to do so, we will now create the function app living on Azure. For that, again, we have a script that is also available within the GitHub repository. And this script is now dependent on the language that you use because the function app might have some restrictions. Now, what's important to know as of now, Netherite is not able to run on a consumption plan. So you need one of those non-consumption plans in order to make things run. You have to set a minimum number of nodes, a maximum number of nodes, of course. As we're using TypeScript, I have to use a runtime node. I use 14. And as an OS type, I use Windows. And what then happens behind the scenes when you call those scripts is that a generic script will be called, which will basically create a function app with the corresponding information and will then do its things. Before we walk through that one, I will now really call that because that takes a bit of a time. So it's again taking the settings PS file and then setting everything up. Now what happens behind the scenes is, as I said, the function app per se will be created with the corresponding variants. Be aware for Python, there is only a Linux variant available. I think the script does not check it, so you have to be aware of that yourself. Of course, again, if the function app already exists, nothing will be done, so it will use just that. What also is done is a setting that's necessary. So the 32-bit worker process is set to false. That's necessary in order to be able to run Netherite. And as a second thing that will be pushed towards Azure is that the Event Hub connection will be directly injected into the app settings. As I said before, that's really just a demo. That's not a production grade setup. After that, The script will then also do some configuration with respect to the scaling of your function. It will update that accordingly. And what it will also do is enable the function runtime scale monitor that needs to be enabled for that setup. So yeah, that's basically it. That's kind of the living room for your function. So let's see where we are. Okay, we have already finished. That's good. Let's check things out on Azure. So we should have now an application insights. Yes, we have an app service plan and we have our function app. That looks good. Okay, so well, taking a look at the configuration, let's see if everything is done nice and neatly. So we have the event hub connection string here that was injected. That's good. We have our function runtime. We have the runtime scale monitor, which is on. That's good. And we are running on a 64-bit platform that's working. And with respect to the app service plan, we have the EP1, which I use, which is kind of the lowest one that works decently. So that's here. Now, with that, everything is in place in order to deploy your function to Azure. And again, for that, we have a little script that helps us there, and that's called deploy TypeScript function. Again, that's has to be dragged out of the scripting folder. In my case, it's everything set up correctly within the GitHub repo. So what this thing basically does is it does an npm install, an npm run build. It does one specific thing, pruning everything for with production setup to get rid of unnecessary files. So for all the dev dependencies. Then it once again does the func extension install and then, well, publishes the code to Azure where we then can call it. And with that, that's basically it. Let's try it out, right? So let's do a deploy. No, we are within the scripts folder, so we have to go one up. We have the deploy TypeScript function.ps. We execute that one. It's using the settings PS and it's doing what it needs to do. Now this can take some time, especially the deployment of the function itself. So publishing the function code to Azure. So that's why I will shortly pause the recording there and we will jump in a second when everything is up and running. And we are back. So everything got deployed. So let's shortly check what happened. So what we already seen before we did this little time warp, the npm installation was done, the TypeScript transpilation was done, and we did the build of the extension project, so of the CS project file, which contains our extension. That worked fine. And then, as usual, the deployment of our Azure function to Azure was executed. And well, as we can see here from the output, we already get the invocation URL, and we see that everything seems to be set up as we would have expected it. So let's see if we can hit that endpoint on Azure and see if we have success there. So let's go to our request file and do now a post request, not against our local endpoint, but against our remote endpoint. As you can see, I have set the authorization of my HTTP endpoint to function. So, but that's kind of a very low barrier to overcome. So let's save that. Let's send it. And here we go. We get the status query. That looks good. So the HTTP endpoint is working. Now let me copy that. And let's do a GET request to that endpoint. That should now contain our result. And yeah, we made it. So that's great. That's cool. We should now also see all that, of course, within our function app. So we should now have our functions in there. Yeah, we have our 3 little friends available there. And obviously, they seem to be running. And yeah, as you can see, there was this execution. That looks good. That looks really good. Now, with that, what did we achieve? Shortly wrapping up things. We had a durable function, a very basic durable function that relied on the Azure Storage as a storage provider. We reconfigured that, and as you saw, it was only a matter of configuration. So we changed just the host.json file, and we installed the extension via func extensions install, and had to wire up things with respect to the access strings and so on. And then we could already execute our function locally in a fully emulated mode. We could then make a setup in a hybrid world, making use of those little scripts that help us and that are available within the official GitHub repository. And after that, after we verified everything went fine there, we could deploy everything by defining a corresponding function app or setting up one, again, with the help of such scripts. And last but not least, we could deploy our Azure function and run it successfully, making use of the new storage provider. Now, of course, this scenario is just to show you what you have to do. This is kind of not really leveraging the qualities that come along with Netherite. So if you have a very complex or very performance-hungry durable function, then I would really try that out and see if everything is working. Nevertheless, be aware, it's in public preview. It's alpha, so there might be some rough edges, as I said, within the configuration section. Now, if you just want to try things out and you don't want to spend not more money that you would really need, there is also one nice script there, which is called delete.ps. So a PowerShell script that helps you with deleting everything. And what it does, it basically just deletes your resource group and all the resources in there. So in order to wrap things up, what we will do now is tear everything down again. And delete our resources. So you get also one question there if you are sure to do that. If you say yes, everything is removed and you will not be charged anymore for your resources that you need in order to make things running. Now with that, I hope I could show you how to make your hands dirty with Netherite. It's not very complicated. You have to know some things, especially if you're using a non.NET language. But no big obstacle to overcome. And I hope that gives you appetite to dive deeper into the area of Netherite. And with that, I thank you for watching and close this video with ABC. Always be curious. See you next time.